Tell us about the situation you found yourself in and how you got out of it. I am a veteran who learned to walk again after being injured, and now I help other veterans. I couldn't walk after the war, but then I fought again, not on the battlefield, but for my life. And now I help other veterans do the same. I was never supposed to walk again. That's how doctors framed my future, lying in a cold hospital room with the smell of disinfectant soaking into my skin. They didn't say it to my face at first. Oh no, they whispered it behind curtains, trading glances as if I was already a ghost. Spinal trauma, best case, wheelchair for life. I heard every word, and maybe, for a moment, I believed them. But this isn't just a story about broken bones or scarred flesh. This is a story about fire, about falling so deep into darkness that the only choice is to claw your way back up, even if it rips your hands bloody. You see, before the blast, I thought I was unbreakable. The uniform made me proud, but it also made me arrogant. I was 26, serving overseas, carrying more weight on my shoulders than most people could imagine. And then came that one mission, the one that rewrote every page of my life. It was supposed to be routine, a dusty road, a convoy, sun hammering down like a spotlight on steel. But war doesn't follow routines. The world split apart in a flash of fire, metal screaming through the air. My body lifted, then slammed into silence. The pain came later. First was the void. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't move my legs. They felt like they belonged to someone else. My brothers in arms were around me, shouting, holding me down, trying to stop the bleeding. I remember thinking, not about dying, but about how shameful it felt to be the one carried instead of carrying. Weeks blurred into months in a military hospital. Imagine lying flat on your back, staring at white ceilings until your own thoughts become enemies. That's where I lived. Every morning the doctors gave me the same look. Accept it. Every night I fought the rage rising in my chest. And then came the lowest point. A letter. Not from home. From the military itself. They called it honorable discharge. I called it exile. In one sentence, they stripped me of identity. No uniform, no mission, no brothers beside me. Just silence. Just me, a broken veteran. I'll be honest, I wanted it all to end. I thought about it more than once. People don't like to hear that, but it's the truth. The battlefield follows you home, and in that quiet room, I was losing the war inside my own head. But then, something happened. Something small, almost invisible, yet it sparked like a match in darkness. It wasn't a doctor. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't some miracle cure. It was a nurse. She wasn't much older than me. She didn't sugarcoat things. One morning, she leaned over my bed and said, "If you let them, this chair will swallow you alive. But if you fight, if you even try, you'll scare the hell out of every statistic they've written about you." Her words hit harder than any explosion I'd faced. And that was the moment the war inside me shifted. I started small, moving a toe. That's it. Most people don't think about how powerful one toe can be until they've lost it. I obsessed over that single movement, sweating, gritting teeth, shaking with frustration. Days became weeks. Then, one day it twitched. A tiny flicker. But to me, it was a revolution. The rehab room became my battlefield. Parallel bars replaced rifles. Every step, or half step, was a firefight. I fell so many times I lost count. Blood on my palms, bruises on my knees, but every fall was a declaration. I'm not done yet. And slowly, impossibly, the impossible cracked open. First came standing, then a step, then two. Every inch was earned with pain most people will never understand. But when I finally walked across that rehab room without collapsing, the nurses clapped. And me? I cried, not out of weakness, out of victory. But here's the thing. This story isn't about me learning to walk again. That was just the beginning. Because the moment I stood on my own 2 feet, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't alone in this war. Out there, thousands of veterans were fighting the same invisible battle I had barely survived. Men and women who wore the same uniform, carried the same scars, and came home to the same silence. Some didn't make it. Some never found that spark. And in that realization, a new mission was born. I didn't fight my way back just to save myself. I fought to stand tall enough to reach others. To tell them, you're not done. You're not broken. You're still a soldier, still a fighter. But before I could help them, I had to face something darker, something I had buried under grit and determination. Because survival isn't the same as healing. And what happened next, the voices, the night terrors, the anger I couldn't control, nearly destroyed everything I'd built. That's where part 2 begins. Because learning to walk was the easy part. Learning to live again, that was war. Walking again felt like a miracle. But miracles, I soon learned, have a way of hiding their sharp edges. Every step forward in that rehab room came at a cost I hadn't accounted for. My mind. My body had obeyed me, but my brain was a battlefield I couldn't see. At night, the silence became deafening. The moment the lights went out, the war returned, not outside in distant deserts, but inside me, alive, relentless. Explosions echoed behind my eyelids. Screams clawed at the walls of my skull. Faces of friends lost stared at me from the shadows, accusing, haunting, unforgiving. I thought I'd left it all behind, but it had followed me home. I didn't sleep much. When I did, I woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering, every muscle screaming. Ordinary noises, doors closing, cars outside, even a creak in the floor, felt like enemy fire. I'd flinch, curl into a ball, whisper apologies to ghosts that weren't there. Rehab had taught me to move, to rebuild my body. But the mind? The mind was a war zone, and no physical therapy could save it. I tried talking to doctors, therapists, even fellow veterans, but their words floated around me like smoke. Nothing stuck. Some days, I hated being alive. I hated that I could walk again, yet my own mind refused to obey me. Walking felt meaningless when every night I fought invisible enemies that left no scars but bled me dry. I felt trapped in my own body, a prisoner of memories I couldn't escape. And then, one afternoon, everything shifted. I was in a local cafe, a quiet place I had wandered into because silence at home was unbearable. I was sipping bitter coffee, trying not to stare at my shaking hands, when I overheard a conversation at the next table. 2 veterans, younger than me, voices low, words sharp with pain. They spoke of nights they couldn't survive, of anger, of feeling useless, of wanting to disappear. Something inside me snapped. I realized in that instant. I'd stared death in the face and walked away, but here they were, standing on the edge of it every day, and I had nothing to give them. Not yet. I started with small things. Simple gestures. A word of encouragement, a nod, a conversation about something besides the war. It was awkward at first. I had learned to talk to walls better than people. But slowly, something remarkable happened. They listened. They trusted me. And in helping them, I began to help myself. I began organizing small meetups for veterans struggling like I had. At first, it was only 2 or 3 people sitting in cramped community rooms, sharing stories, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing at memories that hurt more than they healed. I didn't offer solutions, at least not at first. I just listened. And listening, I realized, can be more powerful than any medicine. But the more I listened, the more I realized the depth of the silence that haunted us all. Stories of loss, betrayal, depression, addiction, things we carried and hid because society didn't know how to see us anymore. Every meeting revealed a new layer of pain. And with each layer, I felt the weight pressing down, threatening to crush me again. One night, after a particularly difficult session, I walked home alone. The streets were empty, the sky a black canvas broken only by streetlights. I thought about the lives I had touched that day, and about the ones I hadn't. My heart ached. I thought about the friend I lost in the explosion, the one I promised I would carry forward. And I realized, with a clarity that scared me, that helping others was no longer a choice. It was survival. You can walk with your legs, but healing? Healing demands that you walk with your soul. And my soul, fractured as it was, had begun to understand its mission. I began to train myself not just to help, but to fight the darkness with knowledge, with strategy. I studied therapies, coping mechanisms, anything that could give me a weapon against the invisible enemy. I learned to read the signs of depression in someone's voice, the shadows of PTSD in their eyes. And when I found it in myself, I had tools ready to battle it before it consumed me. But even with these tools, life wasn't simple. There were days I wanted to scream, days I questioned whether I was really helping or just prolonging my own torment. Some veterans didn't want to be saved, they wanted to disappear, and I couldn't reach them. Those failures haunted me more than the explosion ever did. And then came a challenge that would test everything I had learned. A young veteran, barely 22, came to one of my sessions. His face was pale, his eyes distant. He didn't speak at first, just sat, shaking, staring at the floor. The other veterans tried to engage him. I tried. Nothing worked. The room's energy shifted. Hopelessness filled every corner. I knew I had to reach him, but I wasn't sure if I could. I remember the nights I almost gave up. The nights I felt like surrendering. And then I did the only thing I could. I told him my story, every brutal, honest detail. I told him about the blast, the months on my back, the nights I almost lost myself, and how I clawed my way back, step by step, moment by moment. At first, he didn't move, didn't speak, but after a long silence, he lifted his head. And that small movement, it was everything. It was hope. It was the first step in his journey to walk again, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. That night, I realized something profound. Helping others wasn't just about giving advice. It wasn't about organizing sessions or even having answers. It was about showing them that survival was possible. That even in the darkest moments, someone had walked through the fire and emerged, still breathing, still fighting. But the war wasn't over. Not for me, not for him, not for any of us. Shadows lingered, and new battles emerged every day. And as much as I wanted to celebrate victories, I had to prepare for what came next. Because the biggest challenge wasn't walking or even surviving. It was inspiring others to do the same. And that is where the real mission begins. The first months of helping other veterans were exhausting, but in a way that made me feel alive again. Every story I heard, every tear shed in the small community room, every hesitant smile shared, fueled something deep inside me. I realized I wasn't just helping them survive, I was rebuilding myself with every encounter. But I also knew that isolated sessions, though valuable, weren't enough. There had to be a bigger impact, a lasting bridge between the world we'd lost and the one we had returned to. I started small, a structured program, just a few hours a week where veterans could meet, talk, and engage in physical activity together. Walking, stretching, light exercises, they were simple but symbolically powerful. Movement became a metaphor. We could take one step forward, even when the path was invisible. And slowly, more people joined. Some came reluctantly, some cautiously, and some with suspicion etched into their expressions. The war had taught them to distrust, to expect betrayal. But they stayed. I remember one veteran, Marcus, a tall man with hollow eyes, who hadn't spoken to anyone in over a year. He refused to make eye contact and carried himself like a ghost. For weeks, he came to the sessions, sat silently, nodded at my instructions, but never said a word. I started leaving notes on his chair, small messages of encouragement, reminders that he didn't have to face the shadows alone. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then, one day, after a particularly grueling exercise session, Marcus stayed behind. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but when he spoke, it shook the room. I think I can start walking again. Not just physically, I mean mentally. His words hit me harder than any explosion ever had. That was the moment I understood the true power of connection. Not therapy, not medication, but human presence. But the journey wasn't linear. Progress came with setbacks. Some veterans relapsed into old habits: alcohol, isolation, destructive behavior. Others confronted memories too raw to face. An entire group would feel the ripple of their pain. I learned quickly that patience was just as critical as perseverance. You couldn't force healing. You could only guide, encourage, and walk beside them through the fire. I also faced skepticism from the outside world. Many didn't understand why a wounded veteran, barely recovered, would take on the responsibility of helping others. Some questioned my motives. Some whispered that I was meddling, overstepping boundaries, or that I wasn't trained to handle such trauma. But I knew that training alone couldn't reach where personal experience could. I had survived, and in survival, I had gained insights no degree could teach. Funding was another challenge. The programs, the rooms, the materials, it all cost money I didn't have. I spent nights drafting letters, pitching ideas to local organizations, explaining our mission. Rejection was frequent, but I refused to quit. For every no, I found a yes, and slowly, we gained enough support to expand. Expansion brought new opportunities and dangers. One day, a young veteran named Liam joined our program. He had been discharged under tragic circumstances, facing severe PTSD and an addiction to painkillers. He was volatile, often argumentative, and prone to sudden outbursts. The other veterans avoided him, fearful of triggering their own trauma. I could see the pain he carried, but I also saw the potential for him to heal. It was not easy. Liam pushed boundaries, challenged rules, and even walked out during sessions. I spent hours with him, sometimes just sitting in silence, sometimes walking with him through empty streets late at night, talking about nothing, everything, the war, the pain, life itself. Slowly, he began to trust, not me, not the program, but himself. One evening, he told me something that still haunts me. You believe in me even when I don't. That's something I haven't felt in years. Moments like that were rare and fragile. But they taught me that trust, patience, and consistent presence were the strongest medicine we had. It wasn't about fixing anyone. It was about creating a space where healing could exist. And I realized the most important lesson of all: healing was contagious. When one person began to walk through their darkness, others followed. As the program grew, so did our impact. Veterans who had been isolated for years began forming bonds, creating networks of support, sharing coping mechanisms, and looking out for each other outside of structured sessions. The small community room became a hub of resilience. Each veteran's progress inspired another. And I, too, found myself changing. The weight of my own trauma lessened, not because it disappeared, but because it became part of a larger purpose. But growth also brought exposure. Media attention, local authorities, and even national organizations began noticing our work. Invitations came, speaking engagements, panels, interviews. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want recognition. I wanted results. But I realized that sharing our story could reach veterans who had no way of hearing about our program. Exposure became a tool for survival, not just for me, but for countless others trapped in silence. Yet, with attention came scrutiny. Some criticized our methods, claiming we were too unorthodox or too inexperienced. Others questioned whether someone who had suffered trauma could adequately guide others through it. Every critique was a test, sometimes disheartening, sometimes motivating. But each challenge reaffirmed my commitment. Our work wasn't for applause, it was for life itself. And then, the moment came that truly defined our mission. A veteran walked into our program who had been considered unreachable. Years of trauma, years of failed interventions, years of isolation. When he sat down, silent and withdrawn, I knew we were about to face our greatest test yet. Not just his survival, but our ability to prove that even the most broken among us could find a path forward. The room was tense. Every veteran held their breath, unsure if he would open up or retreat. I approached him slowly, introduced myself not as a leader, but as a fellow survivor. I shared the story of my injury, my nights of terror, my first shaky steps back into the world. I told him that survival was not just possible, it was necessary. And then, something miraculous happened. He spoke. Not much, not fully formed sentences, but enough. Enough to signal the first step toward reclaiming his life. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Our work wasn't just helping individuals survive, it was building a bridge from despair to hope, one person at a time. But I also knew the path ahead would be even harder. Each new veteran brought new struggles, new darkness, and new lessons. And as much as I had grown, I had to prepare myself for the battles yet to come, battles that would test my endurance, my faith, and my belief in the resilience of the human spirit. Because survival, I realized, is never just about walking again. It's about learning to walk through the darkness with others, to carry the weight of shadows, and to rise when everything inside you screams to collapse. And so, with every step forward, I reminded myself, the bridge was not finished. Not yet. But with every life we touched, every veteran we helped, it grew stronger, one step at a time. The winter came hard that year. The city streets were lined with frost, and the cold seemed to seep not only into the bones, but into the spirit. It was during these months that I realized the work we had begun was no longer just about helping veterans. It was about confronting a storm that raged inside all of us. For some, it was the lingering shadows of combat. For others, it was the weight of guilt, of survival, of lives lost. And for me, it was the haunting reminder that even when you survive, the scars don't vanish. They only change shape. One morning, I arrived at the community center to find tension thick in the air. Marcus, who had once begun to open up and walk again with a tentative confidence, had relapsed, not into physical injury, but into isolation and self-loathing. He had barricaded himself in the room, refusing to speak or move. The other veterans stood outside, anxious, unsure if they should intervene. I knocked gently. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady, "I'm here." Silence. I repeated it. Still nothing. Finally, I pushed the door open just enough to slip in. His eyes, hollow and unfocused, met mine for a brief moment before he looked away. I sat on the floor, keeping my distance, knowing he needed space more than persuasion. Minutes passed, then hours. I said nothing, only stayed. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he leaned against the wall, breathing, alive. It was a reminder. Healing was not linear. It was messy, chaotic, and often terrifying. And as much as I wanted to shield these men from pain, I realized I couldn't. All I could do was walk with them through it, step by fragile step. Around that same time, a new challenge emerged. Funding cuts threatened to close our program. The city council deemed our work non-essential in the face of budget constraints. The idea of shutting down after all we had built was unbearable. I spent sleepless nights drafting letters, organizing petitions, and speaking at council meetings. But bureaucracy was slow, and time was unforgiving. Every day we remained open felt like a borrowed chance. In the midst of this, Liam, who had once been volatile and unpredictable, stepped forward. He began leading some sessions, sharing his story, supporting others in ways I hadn't imagined possible. Watching him transform from a broken, skeptical participant to a confident mentor was one of the most profound experiences of my life. And yet, even his light was fragile. We all teetered on the edge of collapse, aware that one harsh word, one failure, could unravel progress painstakingly made. Then, a phone call changed everything. One of our veterans, a quiet man named Henry, had attempted to end his life. I received the call while walking home, the cold biting at my face, my heart sinking into my stomach. I rushed to the hospital, arriving just as doctors were trying to stabilize him. Standing outside the room, listening to the beeping machines, I felt an unbearable mix of fear, guilt, and determination. Henry survived, but the incident shook everyone. The veterans looked at each other differently, realizing just how fragile our collective existence was. I realized that the bridge we had built wasn't just symbolic, it was literally a lifeline. One moment of absence, one misstep, could cost someone everything. The weeks that followed were grueling. We implemented stricter monitoring, more frequent check-ins, and group discussions where nothing was off-limits. We faced every painful topic head-on: trauma, addiction, guilt, and regret. These sessions often left us emotionally drained, but each conversation reinforced the truth I had been discovering all along. Survival isn't a solitary act. It requires a network, a community, a shared commitment to not letting each other fall. Yet, the storm outside mirrored the storm within. One evening, a local reporter came to cover our work. His questions were sharp, probing for drama, for scandal, for failure. He asked about relapses, about the methods we used, about whether we were truly capable of handling such severe trauma. Every word cut like a knife. My first instinct was to shut down, to protect my team, to reject scrutiny. But I realized that transparency was vital. I told him the truth. We weren't perfect. We had failures, moments of despair, setbacks that sometimes seemed insurmountable. But every setback was met with resilience, with effort, with unwavering commitment. The article that followed sparked both praise and criticism. Some called us heroes, others called us reckless. But the attention brought something unexpected. Veterans who had never spoken up before reached out, asking for help, hoping to join our program. In that chaos, I saw an opportunity. The storm, though terrifying, was also fertile ground for growth. And growth demanded sacrifice. I was forced to confront my own limits, the memories I had buried under layers of determination. One night, alone in an empty community center, I broke down. The weight of everything, the lives, the failures, the near deaths, the unrelenting responsibility, crushed me. I sat on the floor, knees to chest, and let the tears come. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel utterly human, utterly fragile, utterly alone. But morning came, and with it clarity. Pain was inevitable, but surrender was not. I stood, brushed off the dirt, and returned to the program, knowing that my breakdown didn't make me weak. It made me ready. Ready to face the next challenge. Ready to lift others even when my own body and mind trembled. The winter wore on, and with it came more tests. Veterans faced relapses, disputes arose within the group, and the constant threat of program closure loomed. Yet, despite everything, we persisted. Each step forward felt monumental, not because it was easy, but because it was earned. The bridge we were building was not made of steel or concrete, but of trust, patience, empathy, and relentless love. And then a breakthrough. One evening, during a group session, a man who had not spoken in months stood and addressed the group. His voice shook, but his words were clear. We are not broken. We are not alone. We survived together. The room erupted, not with cheering, but with something deeper: recognition, solidarity, hope. Every veteran present felt it. Every veteran felt that invisible thread tying us together, stronger than fear, stronger than despair. In that moment, I realized the storm would never fully end. Trauma would always linger, life would always challenge, and darkness would always press. But we had found something that could withstand it: community, connection, a shared purpose that made each battle bearable, each step meaningful. And I knew, as I watched these men and women reclaim fragments of their lives, that my mission had grown beyond my own survival. It was about building a lifeline, a bridge across the deepest darkness, one human being at a time. Because the storm within would always rage. But together, we had learned not just to survive it. We had learned to thrive despite it. Spring arrived slowly, almost hesitantly, as if the earth itself had endured the long winter alongside us. The frost finally melted from the streets, revealing cracks, potholes, and the wear of time, but also life, persistent and relentless. In our program, the change was palpable too. Veterans who had once entered our doors with bowed heads now walked taller, their steps firmer, their voices stronger. The storm we had weathered was not gone, but it had left behind something extraordinary: resilience, connection, and hope. One morning, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten and trembling, from a veteran named Samuel. He had joined our program only a few months prior, quiet, withdrawn, haunted by memories he could not speak aloud. His letter read, "I walk today, not just on the street, but into the world. I carry my past, but it did not carry me. I am alive, and I am free, thanks to the bridge you built for us." I held that paper as if it were a sacred artifact. Every line reminded me why we had endured months of doubt, fear, and exhaustion. It was more than survival. It was transformation. The city council had called a final meeting regarding the future of our program. This time, the room was packed, not just with officials, but with veterans, families, volunteers, and community members. I stood at the podium, the familiar weight of responsibility heavy on my shoulders. But instead of fear, I felt clarity. I spoke from the heart. This program is not charity. It is not a favor. It is a necessity. Every veteran here is a life reclaimed, a family restored, a mind healed. To close this program would be to undo the miracles you cannot see in a budget report. I ask you to see us, not just numbers, but people who will walk into the world stronger because we help them find their steps again. Voices join mine. Marcus, Liam, Henry, Samuel, all stood and spoke of their journeys, of despair transformed into courage, isolation into community. The council members listened, some skeptical, others moved beyond words. When the vote came, it was unanimous. The program would continue, fully funded, a permanent bridge for veterans in need. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with humility. This victory was not mine alone. It belonged to every veteran who had fought their own battles, to every volunteer who had stayed when it would have been easier to leave, to every heart that had believed in the impossible. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts in the veterans. Liam had begun mentoring new participants, offering guidance without the shadow of his past anger. Marcus had started leading outdoor exercises, showing others that progress was possible even after relapse. Henry, once silent and withdrawn, now shared his poetry, capturing pain and hope in ways words had never allowed him before. And Samuel had begun visiting hospitals, reaching out to those still lost in the darkness, reminding me that the chain we had created was extending beyond our walls. One evening, as I walked home, I passed a small park where children played, their laughter sharp and pure against the setting sun. I realized that our work had ripple effects far beyond the veterans themselves. Families had begun to heal, neighborhoods had grown safer, and a sense of understanding had spread in ways we could not quantify. The bridge we built was no longer just for survivors of war. It was for humanity itself. Yet, peace did not mean complacency. The memories of loss and trauma remained, like faint echoes of a storm long past. I would never forget the nights of despair, the phone calls that shook me to my core, the tears of those who had nearly surrendered. But these echoes were no longer chains. They were reminders of the depth of what we had achieved and the potential within every human being to rise, even from the darkest depths. On a quiet morning, I found myself in the training room, empty but for the sunlight streaming through the windows. I placed my hand on the wooden railing, the same railing I had gripped when I first learned to walk again. Memories flooded back. The pain, the fear, the endless repetition of steps that once seemed impossible. And yet, as I stood there, I realized that the railing was no longer a support I needed. It was a symbol of how far I had come, a bridge between who I was and who I had become. The veterans returned one by one, their laughter echoing through the hallways, their steps firm and sure. Each face told a story of survival, of courage, of the relentless human spirit refusing to be broken. And in that chorus of life, I felt the deepest satisfaction I had ever known, not from my own triumph, but from witnessing theirs. Later, at a small ceremony, we unveiled a plaque in the community center. It read, "For those who walk again, and for those who help them find their steps." Veterans, families, and volunteers gathered around, some with tears in their eyes, some smiling quietly, all understanding that these words captured more than a program. They captured a legacy. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like bridges across the city, I realized the truth that had guided me all along. The journey of healing never truly ends. We are all works in progress, constantly rebuilding, stepping forward, extending hands to others. The bridge we create for one person can carry countless others, and each step matters. I looked at the veterans around me, their eyes shining with determination and gratitude. I knew that even when I was gone, the bridge would remain strong, unyielding, a testament to the power of human resilience and compassion. And I smiled, not because the journey was easy, but because it was worth every struggle, every tear, every step taken together. For in helping others walk again, I had discovered the most profound truth of all. In lifting them, I had been lifted. In guiding them, I had found my purpose. And in surviving, we had all learned to thrive, not just in life, but in the hearts of those who had once walked in darkness and now, together, stepped into the light. The bridge of light we had built would never crumble. And as long as one person needed a hand, one heart sought hope, we would walk forward, together, unwavering, unbroken, and unstoppable.